Today's story is about strange lights in the sky on a cold night in March of 1966 that dozens of officers and people saw floating in the woods over the swamp. This incident even caught the attention of a former president of the United States. Stick around to the end of the video where I've got the actual pictures taken on that day. Ghost stories, urban legends, and mysteries. Things that have captured people's attention for thousands of years. From the first known cave paintings where they depicted large humanoid people with animal heads, all the way to today with sightings of Bigfoot, paranormal activity, and unidentified flying objects. And on this channel, we take a look at the unknown. If you enjoy mysteries, like and subscribe to catch all the future videos. It all began on the night of March 14th, when local police officers of Washtenaw County spotted strange lights moving at extremely high speeds over Lima Township. It was too fast to be an aircraft, so they followed the object. When, at the same time, officers in Ohio just across the border, as well as a few observers at Selfridge Air Force Base, were also witnessing these strange lights. Just as the officers that were tailing the object were flying down the road, feeling like they were getting closer to this object, it stopped and went straight up towards the stars and disappeared. They were left in awe. Unable to explain what they just saw, they chose to keep quiet out of fear of being ridiculed and fired. As a few days had passed, the officers were at their station, discussing the week ahead, when a different officer, a more senior officer on the force, was drawing this picture. Well, they asked what he was drawing, and he told them it was this thing that he saw the other night in the sky. Well, they started talking, telling the senior officer that they also saw something strange in the sky the other night. Well, this thing that he was drawing and reported seeing looked exactly like a child's top. Here's a picture of what he drew. Then came the night of Sunday, March 20th, when countless reports flooded the sheriff's office of a UFO landing in a wooded, swampy area of Dexter Township. The police operator continuously asked the people if they were sure it was not a plane crash, but every person insisted this was no plane. There was no crash. It landed. A local truck driver by the name of Frank Manor and his son were already near the area that the strange lights, so they jumped into their truck and they raced to the swamp. When they arrived, there was already multiple people standing on the roadside to see what they could see from the road, where this object was illuminating the area, even though it was so deep in the woods. Well, Frank and his son decided to enter the woods to investigate. When they were about 500 yards from this thing, they could see it a little clearer. It was kind of in the shape of a pyramid with a bright bluish green light on the right hand side, and on the left hand side was another bright light, but this one was white. The body of this craft was kind of similar to a yellowish coral rock. They couldn't really see any antennas or portholes for anybody to get in. Frank stated that you couldn't see it very well because of the heat waves that was surrounding it, kind of like what you see when you're in the desert and you look off into the distance and it kind of looks like everything's a little wavy. They attempted to walk closer to the object, but the light that was previously white turned to a blood red. Just then, his son Ronald noticed two flashlights on the other side of the swamp, approaching the object from the other side. And in an instant, the object flew straight up out of the swamp, going so fast that the force actually broke the branches on its way up. There was 40 to 60 people that had accumulated on the edge of the tree line, including 12 local police officers from the surrounding counties. When they saw the object fly quickly, where it then hovered at the treetops about 1,500 feet away, just for a few seconds, till it blinked out, and in a second later, it reappeared instantaneously all the way on the other side of the swamp, about 2,000 feet from its previous location. The whole object illuminated the tops of the trees. At one point, it even rose 500 feet and then descended again, far too fast for any man-made thing. After a few minutes of this thing kind of dancing in the sky, it took off at an extremely high speed directly over the people that were standing at that tree line. They said it sounded like it had a whistling sound, like a bullet ricochet. Well, this report gained national attention when NICAP, also known as the National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena published their investigation on the experience. More than 40 officers joined in the search of the swamp, where they were also witnessing these odd lights in the sky over the swamp, where these lights were spotted flying back and forth, then disappearing again. The next day, as the sun went down and the darkness took over again, there were students at Hillsdale College who looked out the window and they saw these lights. Well, they notified the group that they were with. As the word spread throughout the campus, it spread like wildfire. More than 80 students reported seeing these lights off in the sky, sparking kind of a UFO craze. Well, a very known and respected news anchor, Walter Cronkite, reported the story on national news, which prompted then Congressman and future President Gerald Ford, who insisted on that an investigation take place performed by Project Blue Book, where they sent a member of the Robinson panel, which was a highly respected group. Well, when Dr. J. Allen Hynek arrived on March 23rd, he toured the area of the sighting, saying that he found something he called near hysteria. As he was attempting to talk to the locals and investigate the area, he was pressured by his superiors because this was national news. The rumors were spreading across the country like wildfire. Under pressure, Hynek scheduled an interview with the reporters on March 25th, where he said the lights were simply mistaken observations of the moon and the stars, and that the Dexter UFO was actually just swamp gas. This swamp gas theory didn't sit well, as many thought it was just a huge cover-up and the government was hiding evidence and trying to silence the people from spreading it any further. Years later, Douglas Harvey, who was the head sheriff at the time of the original sightings, told Ann Arbor News that he and Dr. Hynek were discussing the sightings at the sheriff's office one day, where the scientist had admitted to him that he didn't know what the witnesses had seen, but that he felt it was worthy of investigation. Well, later on that same day, he says he saw Dr. Hynek make a phone call to Washington, which he was on the phone for a lengthy amount of time. Shortly after that call is when he scheduled with the reporters and claimed it away as swamp gas. Harvey wondered what on that phone call changed his opinion. Did a high-level government official tell him to just say it was swamp gas? Well, as more than 50 years have passed, the government now admits to having unidentified flying objects in our airspace. Could the 1966 Dexter lights have actually been a UFO, or was it really swamp gas? Something that has never seemed to happen again since. What do you think? Leave your comments in the comments section below. Today's story is about strange sightings of a mysterious dog-headed, human-type creature that lurks in the woods throughout Michigan and has been reported for over 100 years that Michiganders call the Dogman. It is believed that the Dogman appears every 10 years, specifically the years ending in the number 7. So do you think the Dogman's gonna appear in 2027? Ghost stories, urban legends, and mysteries. Things that have captured people's attention for thousands of years. From the first known cave paintings where they depicted large humanoid people with animal heads, all the way to today, with sightings of Bigfoot, paranormal activity, and unidentified flying objects. And on this channel, we take a look at the unknown. If you enjoy mysteries, like and subscribe to catch all the future videos. The legend is said to have begun back in the year 1887 in Wexford County, which is located about 30 miles south of Traverse City, where two lumberjacks were working their way through the heavily wooded area when in the distance they noticed a strange creature, which at first glance they thought was a large man or a bear because it was tall and it was standing on its hind legs. They cautiously proceeded through the thickets. When they got closer, they realized it was no man or a bear because its head was in the shape of a dog. It had a long, slender body that the men were terrified, and the only weapons that they even had available were 2 axes that they had brought in to chop the trees. So, knowing they were outmatched, especially if there was a pack of these dogs, so they turned around and they fled the same way they came in. On the way out, they proceeded to look over their shoulders to make sure that this creature was not following them. When they returned to the town of Cadillac, they told the locals, which most of the locals thought these men were drunk or maybe had gone crazy. A few of the locals actually decided to investigate the area, where they reported seeing no beasts, but they did find hundreds and hundreds of tracks of wolves, which wolves were pretty prominent in the area at that time. So, throughout the next 50 years, as the area started to become more and more populated, there was few to no reported sightings of this beast, except in 1917, when some teenagers who had been stashed in the woods throwing a little party say they witnessed this large beast just outside their party spot. They didn't quite speak a word of it because they thought they were going to get in trouble. Well, then came the year 1921, when they decided to finally speak about the experience. But most of the locals didn't take them serious. They chalked it up as silly kids. Then came a man named Robert Fortney, who resided in Paris, Michigan, where in 1937 he was out fishing on the Manistee River. As he calmly fished, he had heard large cracks of tree branches approaching from behind him. Well, where he was, this specific fishing hole, there's not many people that came back because it was almost 2 miles back in the deep woods off the normal path. So when he heard this noise, he figured it must be an animal instead of a person, so he sat down his fishing pole and he picked up his shotgun that he always carried with him. As he was watching, waiting for this thing to exit the thick trees, he noticed it was a pack of 5 wild dogs that must have smelled the fish that he had on shore about 10 feet away from where he was fishing. One of these dogs was huge compared to the other 4. It seemed to have less fear than the rest of the 5 dogs. Barreling out towards the fish, he thought, that big one must be the pack leader. Then, in a sudden, they pounced on the fish, wiping out a large chunk in just seconds. Robert was stunned at how aggressive they were, and specifically the size of that one. So he raised his shotgun, and he fired 2 shots. Bang, bang. 4 of the dogs took off, back into the woods. But one dog stayed. It was the big one, showing no fear as this dog stood up on its back legs, with its amber-colored eyes just glaring back at Robert for what felt like an eternity. All of a sudden, this creature, still standing on its back legs, it had to have been 7 to 8 foot tall, turned and sprinted like a human running on a track. The noises of the crackling branches continued for about 15 seconds, when he then heard this blood-curdling scream that he almost thought was a man screaming because it echoed so much through the woods and it sounded like a man. Then everything went silent. All you could hear was the water running from the stream. No birds, no frogs, no anything. Terrified, Robert loaded 2 more shots into his gun and fled, leaving his fishing pole laying right where he had set it down next to the river. He even left the pile of fish. The whole way back to the main trail, he still never heard any other animals. In this path he took, it was narrow and in a heavily wooded area, so it took a considerable amount of time for him to get back out to the main path. Well, when he returned to town, he told the sheriff, who insisted he must have encountered a pack of wild wolves, and that he probably should not return to the area for any reason. Similar reports of this creature came in 1947 in the town of Manistee, and again throughout the 50s in Allegan County. Many people agree with Linda S. Godfrey when she wrote in her book, The Beast of Bray Road, where she compares the Manistee sightings to the similar creature that's been sighted over in Wisconsin, known as the Beast of Bray Road, or as the Wisconsin werewolf. Do you think they could be the same creature? Maybe it returns to Michigan every 10 years for mating, when with the ice, the travel between the states wouldn't be terribly hard. Then came the year 1967, when a very popular sighting was reported when 4 campers were staying in a secluded campsite in Cross Village. When they noticed through the day, while they were setting up their campsite, there was an eerie silence. There was not one animal making any noise in the area, almost like they were avoiding the area, which was already strange. Well, they shrugged it off, and they continued. Later that night, though, while they were sitting around the campfire, telling stories and snacking, one guy was laying back, just watching the stars. When out of the corner of his eye, he thought he saw movement just inside the tree line. Well, this campsite was deep, deep back in the woods, with no neighboring campsites around, and they thought this must be someone lost in the woods who could hear them and was trying to find them. All 4 campers, they got up and they started trying to kind of call this thing over. As they got past the campfire, about 15 feet from the tree line, they noticed this thing was not looking for them. It was more pacing back and forth inside the tree line. Well, one of them hollered, "Do you need help?" This creature stopped, dead in its track. Well, so did the campers. Peculiarly, one of the campers again hollered, "Hello!" This creature turned its head to look at them. With the light from the campfire, they could see this thing was huge. And he had a head like a wolf with its long, sharp teeth out, like it was ready to attack the campers. They turned and ran back to the tents. Well, they all ended up piling into one tent, and they tried to remain as quiet as possible, even though their curiosity had them wondering. What you could hear was this thing getting closer and closer to their campsite, and with a loud bang, they knew it was close. It must be messing with their food, their supplies. But no one could bear looking out to see what this thing was. Well, what felt like forever, the noises eventually stopped, and the silence was back again. But it was too dark now to go investigate. The fire had to have been out, so they had no light out in the middle of the woods. Well, after being cooped up all night, the next morning came. As the sun finally came up, they exited the tent to discover that this thing destroyed the campsite. Everything in the campsite. Everything except for the one tent that they were all cooped up in. But they couldn't find any hair or any bite marks or anything, meaning it just ransacked the place, but it didn't eat any of the food or anything. All there was these giant dog prints around the site. Being too large to be a normal wolf or a wild dog, they quickly packed up some of their stuff and they fled, planning to never return to the area again. Well, on their way out, they noticed the animals were back. They could hear the birds chirping, the squirrels wrestling around in the foliage again. Well, that's when they realized all the animals must have feared and fled the area because of whatever that creature was. Whether the creature is real or just misidentified animals is still up to debate to this day. The legend really exploded after a 1987 DJ named Steve Cook aired a song that he created, The Legend. The song was just an April Fool's joke, but Steve claims that he made up all the stories in the song. But after the song was released, reports flooded in of people that say they encountered the Dogman. After many years past a more modern experience, it is said that in 2017, a truck driver named Joe Berger, who was a 6-year Army veteran, and he was transporting for 43,000 pounds of paper from a northern Michigan mill while he was driving through a heavily wooded area in the Manistee National Forest when he encountered the beast that he described as the Dogman. He says it must have been 10 foot tall, a werewolf type creature that ran beside his truck. He said this creature had all black fur, tall pointed ears, and scary yellow eyes. The beast had at least 3-inch long fangs on the top and the bottom of its mouth, which were super bright as contrasted with the black fur. Joe reported that the beast actually jumped onto the side rail of the driver's side of the truck while he was driving. Stunned by this thing, he remembered he had a pistol in the seat right next to him. So he pulled up the weapon and he fired one shot, apparently right through its eye socket. The animal fell from the truck and it rolled into a small ditch. By the time he got his truck turned around and returned to the area, the thing had vanished. The next day, people went to go investigate, where they found no sighting of this creature, or any signs of blood or hair or anything. So this creature somehow either avoided the gunshot, or it was shot and somehow escaped without dropping any blood or anything. So the legend claiming that the Dogman appears every 10 years, ending with the number 7. Do you think 2027 will be the next time the Dogman will be sighted? And do you think the Dogman of Michigan is real, or just many, many cases of misidentified other animals? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Today's story is about a family that bought a new house, then started receiving these anonymous letters threatening the family so much that they never actually moved into the house. This mystery actually has no relation to Michigan at all. But they made a Netflix series about the story that they called The Watcher. Now, there's the show, and then there's reality, with some obvious discrepancies between the two. I personally like the true story better, as it has more, you could say, wonder to it. Well, today, we're going to take a look at the Derek and Maria Brodus who purchased the seemingly normal house at 657 Boulevard, then started receiving these strange letters. Stick around to the end of the video where I show the actual letters that the family received, as well as the actual picture of the family that had these experiences. Derek and Maria purchased this property in the summer of 2014, shortly after Derek's 40th birthday. The house and the neighborhood seemed perfect for the family of 5. See, Maria actually grew up in Westfield, just a few blocks away from this house. Derek, on the other hand, was raised in a working-class family in Maine, where he had worked hard to advance up the ladder at the insurance company in Manhattan till he reached senior vice president, earning a salary large enough to afford the $1.3 million home. Westfield, New Jersey was even ranked in the top 50 safest towns in the United States in 2014. When they first purchased the house, they were overcome with excitement, as they now had a large, beautiful house for their family to grow up in. The children were already debating which fireplace Santa would use. Shortly after purchasing the place, before they were even set to move in, Derek decided to do some renovations to kind of modernize the house for the family. The renovations were only expected to take a few weeks to complete. As their excitement continued to grow for the completion of the renovation and fully moving in, everything changed in a heartbeat. When they stopped by the house to check up on the beginning of the renovations, when Derek noticed that they had mail in the mailbox. Thinking nothing of it, he opened up the mailbox and he found a few articles of mail. The first being a bill. So he flipped it to the back. The second one, just a pile of junk. So he again flipped that one to the back. But then came the third, which was labeled only as "To the New Owners" and signed "The Watcher." This was when his excitement turned to curiosity. What was the Watcher? Who the hell is the Watcher? And why is the Watcher putting a letter in my mailbox? Derek proceeded to open the letter cautiously, as to see what was inside. Maria, who was sitting still in the van in the driveway, noticed that his eyes were getting larger as he looked at this paper. His body language was showing concern as he started surveying the neighborhood, trying to see if there was anybody out that, was maybe outside watching them, or maybe looking in their windows, or doing anything suspicious. But he didn't see anything out of the normal. Still in fear of what he was reading in this letter, he slammed shut the mailbox, and in a rushing manner, he returned to the van. Still looking around the neighborhood, as he got into the driver's side of the van, he jumped in, took a deep breath. Still having the look of concern on his face, Maria, his wife, asked him, "Is everything all right?" He couldn't even get the words out, so he just handed Maria the letter. As Maria opened the letter, Derek slammed the van into drive and sped down the road to Maria's surprise. Derek was a very cautious driver, so him doing that was very out of the norm, and it got Maria's curiosity way up there. But very quickly, Maria's curiosity turned to dread as she read the letter, which claimed that the house had been a point of obsession for the anonymous harasser's family for many, many decades. Where in the letter, it explained that his grandpa watched the house back in the 20s. His dad watched the house back in the 60s. And it explained that since his father's passing, this new person was put in charge of watching the house. The first letter arrived within days of purchasing the house. In fact, the first letter was dated for June of the 4th. It was the June 5th when they discovered the first letter, and on June 2nd was the date that they made the purchase. So within 2 days, the Watcher had written the letter. The letter had so many eerie details about the author's obsession with the house, as well as made mentions of the make and the model of the Honda minivan that Derek and Maria owned, and seeing the contractors arriving, which made it clear to them that this person had physically been able to see the house the whole time. Worried about the whole situation, Maria reached out to the former owners of the house, John and Andrea Woods, who had purchased the place from Seth and Floyd Bakes back in the 1990s. Andrea responded quickly, as the next day she told them about a letter that they received, which was just days before closing on the house, which simply stated, "Thank you for taking such good care of the house." Signed, The Watcher. Andrea thought the letter was more strange than threatening, so she just discarded the letter and continued on with the day. Now that they had heard that the Broadduses had also received a letter from the mysterious person, the Woods decided to join Maria in reporting the strange letter to the police department. When Detective Leonardo Luigo saw the letter, he instructed both families to not speak a word to anyone about the letter, so they could investigate. The following week, the detectives were trying to discover who could have written the letter. Well, talking to fellow officers that were familiar with the residents of the area, a name kept popping up. That name was Michael Langford, who was an adult child living at home with his mother right next door to the Broadduses' new house at 661 Boulevard. The police brought Michael down to the station for an interview. Neighbors described Michael as being kind of like a Boo Radley kind of character. Michael spent most of the day at the station answering questions after Michael still denied knowing anything about the letters. A few weeks went by and everything seemed normal. They had not received any new letters, there had been no leads in the investigation, and the renovation was continuing on schedule. The family thought, good. The police questioning people scared off the supposed watcher, but then came the day of June 18th, when they arrived at the property like they had been doing often to talk to the contractors and monitor how things were coming. Maria this time opened up the mailbox to discover a second letter. Maria was in shock when she saw M.M. Broaddus stamped on the paper. Maria immediately called Derek over as she opened the letter, and with a look of horror on her face as she was reading the beginning, by that time Derek was right there. He grabbed the letter from her, where he then saw why she had that look on her face. As he read the letter, which included alarming information, the Watcher had learned the names, even the nicknames, of the 3 young children. The letter also asked if they had found what was in the walls yet. The author referred to the children as young blood, asking if they would be playing in the basement, which was already eerie enough. Well, in this letter they say, are they afraid of the basement? Along with claiming that if it was them, they would be scared because when the children were in the basement and the adults were upstairs, they would never be able to hear the children scream. They even asked who would be using which bathroom, and that they would find out when they moved in. They were terrified, so they reached out to the local police again in late June, with the investigation from the police supplying very little updates. The family decided to launch their own investigation. They employed a private investigator who staked out the neighborhood. He ran background checks on the neighbors, which resulted in no noteworthy evidence. Even a former FBI was hired to conduct a threat assessment, where he recognized several old-fashioned ticks in the letters, which he pointed out to that it was probably an older writer. His example was that in the envelope addressed M.M. Broaddus, which is an older way of stating Mr. and Mrs. Broaddus, he also noted that there was a lack of profanity in these letters, referring to the writer would probably be a woman or somebody a little less macho. The investigation also noted that there were 2 sex offenders living near the home, but nothing ever pointed towards those 2 individuals. One painter working on the house, Bill Woodward, said that he noticed the people living in the home behind the Broadduses had 2 lawn chairs positioned oddly close to the house. He reported to Derek that one day he noticed an older man sitting in the lawn chair positioned perfectly to watch the Broaddus house. After finding out all this information and the nature of the 2 letters received, they made a decision that they would no longer allow the children to come to the house with them, in fear of the children's safety. When they first purchased the house and started the renovations, the couple was going to the house pretty much every day, for most of the day, even some nights staying all night. After the two letters and their appearances became more and more sparingly, especially leaving the children at home with Maria's mother. After a short time had passed of only the contractors showing up to the house, Derek and Maria arrived at the house one day. Derek was very hesitant this time to open the mailbox, but he did anyways, where he discovered the third letter, from which the watcher asked, "Where have you gone? 657 Boulevard has been missing them." The letter also demanded that they stop making the changes to the house. The family decided that the best thing for them to do would be to fully abandon the house. So, it said that they had to borrow some money from their family to purchase a new house in Westfield, but they did it under an LLC to protect their privacy. But there was still a problem. They had a house, a big house, that they were paying on and renovating, but they didn't feel safe to live in the house. So they ended up needing to sell after they finished the renovations. Well, they let some time pass, letting the police and their hired help continue the investigation on the now 3 letters. After a few months passed, and it was in the cold months, December, the police let them know that they had ran out of options. The case would stay open, but with no fingerprints, no digital trace, and the DNA not matching any of the suspects, there's very little hope. Now into February, less than a year from buying the house, they made the final decision to sell 657 Boulevard. They insisted that they would list it for $1.49 million to reflect the renovations and hoping they would be flooded with offers. But as the rumors of the mysterious event spread around the community in the neighboring towns, they found it was going to be a lot more challenging as potential buyers were kind of spooked. So in the approximate 6-month period of them purchasing the house, they went through renovations, adding their own touches like painting, hiring contractors. They sadly never even got a chance to fully move into the house. After a month went by with no serious offers on the house, they finally chose to lower the price of the house to $1.3 million. As the months continued to pass, they had to continue to lower the price. In the time, they filed a lawsuit against the former owners of the house, in which the former owners filed a countersuit, in which both eventually were just thrown out by a judge. In September of 2016, they filed an application to tear down 657 Boulevard and divide the property to build 2 new houses. But there was a loophole. The 2 new lots would measure 67 feet wide, which is 3 inches less than the mandated 70 foot wide. And so they needed to get an exception from the planning board. Well, more than 100 residents showed up to voice their concerns, which the board eventually just rejected. The whole town didn't even like the idea. On Christmas Eve of 2017, multiple families, specifically the ones that were most vocal against criticizing the family for receiving these letters, they received letters captioned with "Friends of the Brodus family." Sometime later, Derek did admit that he wrote those letters. The following year, the case was turned over to the Union County office, who conducted their own investigation. Knowing that it was a female that licked the envelope from the DNA, they asked the neighbors to submit voluntarily some DNA samples. Several of the neighbors were not home at this time, and 2 people actually refused to give their DNA sample. They continued to try to sell the house, and in July of 2019, they finally made the sale for a major loss. They sold the house for $959,000. And this case still is open today. This was never been solved. Who do you think wrote the letters? Do you think it could be Derek and Maria, thinking they could be better off? Or maybe a neighbor? Or maybe the whole community together against the Broduses? On a side note, I personally think that Abby, Michael Langford's 60-year-old sister, wrote those letters, explaining the older style of wording in the letters. Her DNA did not match the envelopes, but they also lived with their 90-year-old mother, Peggy, who was never asked to give her DNA sample. I think that Abby wrote the letters, and then she had her mother, Peggy, lick the envelopes. That would explain why her DNA didn't match the old-timey letters, and she was kind of strange. What do you think? Who do you think did it? Today's story is about ghostly encounters of black masses rushing people and Revolutionary War veterans roaming around on the historic Mackinac Island. The island, which is nestled just a few miles from my hometown of St. Agnes, it has been home to the Native Americans for hundreds of years. The Ottawa tribes resided there alone until around the 17th century when the Europeans came and started exploring the island. Before we get too far into the ghost stories surrounding the island, I want to touch on the history of the island so you can kind of see where these ghosts may have originated. With the history of the Native American presence on the island, there's many cemeteries, some that date so far back they became more unrecognizable and lost to nature. Until years went by, and while building more modern homes and buildings, they would come across these ancient burial grounds all across the island. As well as after the Europeans arrived, they turned the island into sort of a central hub for the Great Lake fur trade, which led to the establishment of Fort Mackinac, which was the eventual stage of two major battles during the War of 1812. So, with the rich and violent history, it is easy to see why there's so many areas on the island that are said to be haunted. It's pretty much just a huge Indian burial ground where they went and built a fort and then had battles resulting in many, many deaths. We're going to discuss multiple locations on the island that are said to be haunted. Ghost stories, urban legends, and mysteries. Things that have captured people's attention for thousands of years. From the first known cave paintings where they depicted large humanoid people with animal heads, all the way to today with sightings of Bigfoot, paranormal activity, and unidentified flying objects. And on this channel, we take a look at the unknown. If you enjoy mysteries, like and subscribe to catch all the future videos. We're going to start with a very well-known building on the island that kind of catches your eye on the boat ride over, called the Grand Hotel, where legend has it that construction workers uncovered human remains while digging the hotel's foundation. There is said to be dozens and dozens of entities in that hotel. People have reported hearing creaks and even the doors shutting when there was nobody else around, as well as ghostly figures sensed shortly after the building had began. In the years that have passed, many reports came out of things that have been seen in the Grand by staff. Staff have even reported seeing a gentleman dressed to his best, with his top hat and all, calmly playing a piano at the hotel bar. But if you approach him, the sound of the piano will stop and he will just vanish into thin air. Others have seen a younger woman, dressed in old Victorian-type clothing, wandering endlessly through the halls, with her head kind of looking around like she's looking for something or someone. Reports even say that she will move objects and blankets on the beds as if she was getting ready to lay down. The earliest known report in the hotel comes from a maintenance man who was working on the theater stage all alone at night when he saw what he described as an evil entity. It was a black mass with huge glowing red eyes. He froze until this mass started rushing him from one side of the stage to the other. Well, as he was trying to flee, he felt two hands touch his back and shove him where he fell, and he hit his head, knocking him unconscious. Well, when he fell, he kind of tumbled between the curtain wall and the wall, so no one could see him. Nobody even noticed that he was missing. After 2 days had went by, he woke up, stunned and terrified, not knowing exactly what happened. He fled. The next day, he approached his boss to tell him that he was quitting. And he wouldn't say why, but he never returned back to that hotel. Another hot spot on the island is referred to as the Drowning Pool. It received its name because of the brutal history that took place back in the late 1700s when they used the area for witch trials. Well, back in those days, the method that they used to determine if the accused was actually a witch or not was they would tie rocks to their feet and then they'd throw them into a body of water to see if they would float or not. If they sank, they were deemed innocent, because if they were a witch, they would save themselves and float. It is said in 1793 there were 7 women that were accused of practicing witchcraft, where they were forcibly marched through town town to a lagoon between Mission Point and the downtown area, where they held a trial. They dumped all 7 women into the water, where they all sank and drowned. Legend says that the women still haunt the water to this day, with countless reports of mysterious splashing and dark figures floating above the surface of the water, as well as what has been described as a group of women crying late at night. That sounds like it's just over your shoulder, but when you turn to see where these cries are coming from, they follow, almost sounding like they are right on your back. I personally even had my own experience in this location when I was younger. It all started in the afternoon on one of the colder months. It must have been November or December. Well, while I was sitting on the edge of the water where the ice and the land connect, I was standing right off a brittle point where I saw this speck, maybe 5 feet in front of me. It looked like just a little piece of dirt on the top of the ice. Well, knowing that it's not very deep right there, I figured it must just be a piece of dirt, speck, something. Well, throughout time, this thing slowly started moving towards me. And as it did, it got bigger and bigger. Now, it really caught my attention because whatever it was, it shouldn't be moving, let alone there was no wind, so what would be pushing it? Thinking maybe it was a fish or something like that, I watched it. As it got closer and closer, maybe 2 feet in front of me, where the water is only about ankle high, so I mean there's no way that there would have been anything really under there, because with it being frozen, I mean there would only be a little bit of water under there. Well, not knowing what this thing was, I watched it, and as it got bigger and bigger, it reached about the size of a beach ball, and then it vanished just in thin air. Well, I didn't know what to think of it, so I just waited for my friend to arrive. I finally told him about the story, and he just reassured me that it must have been a fish. Well, I do still wonder to this day what that blob underneath that ice really was. Then comes the fort, a Revolutionary War area fort, which has become a tourist site on the island. Many people have reported strange orbs appearing and disappearing in many of the pictures throughout the fort. In the fort hospital, people say there's a feeling of sadness that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, as well as people witnessing what they have called phantom limbs. A war reenactor years ago says that while he was walking into the hospital, he noticed laying on the floor what looked like a leg. It looked like this leg had been blown off by maybe a cannon or an explosion. The thigh area was still gushing blood into the floorboards, and then in the blink of an eye, it vanished. It was gone. It's also said that in the officer stone quarters, it's another location in the island where ghostly children are said to roam. They play with toys in the rooms, throwing the toys all over the rooms for the morning staff to clean up. Mission Point was home to the moral realignment movement that started back in the 1930s. The building began to be built in the late 1950s and is now home to one of the most popular ghost stories on the island. It's about a man named Harvey who died in the late 60s. The story goes that Harvey was dealing with a broken heart and decided to take his own life behind the resort, where he wasn't discovered until almost 6 months had passed. Some people actually think there's more to Harvey's story, and he was actually murdered. Visitors have said that while they were in the theater, they felt like someone was watching them, and it even felt like a pinch and even pokes. A young woman claims that while she was visiting the resort, she experienced strange activity while in her room alone. The bathroom door randomly slammed shut, and then the lights just turned off, which was terrifying. She tried to flip the light switch, but nothing happened. So she fled. She never returned to that room alone. Another report comes from Reddit, where a yearly tourist reports that when they were a child visiting the Windermere Hotel with their grandmother, staying 4 nights in the hotel nestled on the bottom floor, on their first night, as they both slept on separate beds, it wasn't until early morning when the girl woke up and she rolled over to see that grandma was still sleeping, but there was something else in the room. With the morning sun piercing through, she could see what looked like an elderly woman in a white nightgown with an Amish-type bonnet on her head, standing over her grandma. After a few seconds went by and her brain was trying to rationalize what she was seeing, she yelled, "Grandma!" That was the moment that the bed just started shaking and grumbling. She pulled the covers up over her head. Terrified, she stayed under the covers for the rest of the night, for what felt like forever, till the sun was so bright and she finally heard Grandma starting to get up. So she got up. She asked Grandma. Maybe it was a bad dream, I don't know. So she asked Grandma, "Did you get up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom or something?" Grandma said no. She didn't get up at all. She slept all the way through the whole night. So she told Grandma what she had seen. Grandma immediately believed her because, the legends that persist on the island, there's got to be different things that you're not going to understand. So they chose to switch rooms where they stayed the other 3 days. They never had another experience, but all the years that they've came back to the island, they've chose to not go to that room. With countless ghost stories from locals and visitors alike. Another interesting one comes from a person who lived on the island for approximately 5 years. One night, while it was really late, they were walking from the gatehouse, and while they turned down Market Street, they noticed to the right of them, the street light down by the Kingston was just flashing absolutely crazy, uncontrollably. Well, with the old cemetery that's in that area, it's a well-known hotbed for activity. They never again witnessed the light doing that or any other experiences, but who knows? Have you ever been to Mackinac Island? Have you ever had a ghostly experience? If so, leave a comment down in the comment section below. Welcome back. This week on Michigan Mysteries, we're taking a look at the legend of the Loch Ness Monster of Michigan's Lake Superior, better known by the locals as Bessie. Before we get too deep into the legend, if you have a friend that has a lock code on their phone, steal their phone and smash that like button until they get locked out of their phone. Then you can go ahead and give their phone back to them. Now, if you like mysteries and mysterious content, consider taking the subscribe button onto a drive and nudge the bell notification before you get into the car so you can be the most up to date on the next mystery video. With 5 Great Lakes surrounding Michigan and the waters running deep, especially in Lake Superior, the waters run so deep, in fact, entire ships have been lost in it over the years. Example being the Edmund Fitzgerald. Allegedly, there's also a serpent-type creature in the depths of Lake Superior that goes by the name Pressie. Pressie is a whale-tailed, horse-headed Lake Superior creature known for its sightings around the Presque Isle River. Similarly, Pressie is known for its dark color, its whiskers, and it ranges over 100 feet long and lies coiled at the bottom of the lake until it is disturbed. While Michigan is known for many, many notable monsters such as the Dogman and the Torch Lake Monster, Pressie's strange appearance and history are truly interesting. Even so, some may wonder if it's a creature from a long ago time when dinosaurs roamed the earth, but whether it's a prehistoric beast or not matters very little, as the stories about Pressie share similar qualities with the stories about the Loch Ness Monster. Some people see it on the lake, others can only speculate as to its existence. The stories all started with the indigenous residents of Michigan when they supposedly saw a monster that they called Mishupishu, which ran blackish green and was 75 feet long. However, reports state that there is a distinct difference between the two. Pressie is in fact Mishupishu's neighbor in Lake Superior. In 1894, 2 crews on steamer vessels near Carper Harbor spotted a strange creature along in the twilight, with its back protruding from the water. Later, in 1895, it was spotted again near Whitefish Point, curiously investigating a ship by swimming nearby. In 1897, a Detroit man in Duluth, Minnesota, fell aboard his yacht, and he was almost constricted by Pressie. His shipmates claimed to have seen the creature as well. What is more, it was seen again in 1930 near Pictured Rocks in Michigan, and again in the 1960s when a family spotted it off of Sugar Island. Here's a quick video of the monster that has been spotted in Lake Superior. In 1977, Pressie became well known when an out-of-focus photograph by Randy Braun, who was out on a hike, appeared to show the lake monster emerging from the water. Stick around to the end of the video to see the actual photo he took and the interview that he gave years later about his experience. Here's a quick photo of the head of the creature in the photo. Additionally, Pressie was reported over time in the Straits of Mackinac. In addition, that a fisherman near Point Iroquois in the mid-1990s claimed to have seen the creature wrench a buck from the shore and pull it underwater, leaving only its severed head. In researching Pressie, I found a great deal of information on sightings, but not many of the reaching back to tangible sources. That's actually okay with me, because Pressie sightings are the thing of folklore. Stories that people share about a creature or an event to explain something else. For me, in the context of folklore, Pressie explains the unknown regarding the waters of Lake Superior, from yesteryear all the way to today. Lake Superior is a large, cold lake that carries with it tragedy, death, and mystery. Adding a slithering serpent to the mix adds a bit of drama to the otherwise costly lake, and it also helps us address the extent of questions about what could be down there in the darkness. That is to say, what could be lurking at the bottom of the lake. If it's just a large serpent in the waters, then we have our answer. Pretty neat. Here, we're going to put the interview into the video so you can leave your own opinions on what was captured in the photo. Is it a log? Is it a weird rock? Or could it really be something even stranger in this video, and something even stranger actually lurking in the depths of Lake Superior? Leave your comments.
In and out of the boulders along the shore, which are very hard to see right now. It made its way this way, and as it did, I took my backpack, brought it over here like this, got my camera, which was in the top of my backpack, got down behind the boulder like this, resting my camera like this as close as I could to the boulder, and it came up here and stopped, and it was in the water like this. Its back was coming out of the water, and its head was coming out of water in a teeter-totter fashion like this. Under the water with the head, both the head and the back out of the water, then the back under the water, the head out of the water like this. Not completely out of the water, almost. The lower part of the jaw always seemed to be just under the surface. That's when I decided to line up the shot so I could get a shot of the back and the head, what I thought was a head. So the only time I could do that is at the time that both of them were just on the surface of the water, and I took a picture. And after that, it maybe went under the water, teeter-tottered a couple more times, and then it went that way parallel to the shore, out into the water where there was a low layer of fog, very thin and wispy low fog that you could see pretty much through. It was transparent almost.